The woman stumbled into the dusty ranch yard just as the sun began its descent behind the Montana mountains, her dress torn and her dark hair matted with trail dust. And Thomas Fletcher knew immediately that she was running from something far more dangerous than a wild animal. He stood from the fence post he had been mending, wiping sweat from his brow with a weathered hand, his blue eyes narrowing as he watched her collapse near the water trough. His ranch hands had already spotted her, but Thomas waved them off, approaching the woman himself with cautious steps. She looked up at him with eyes the color of storm clouds, filled with equal parts fear and defiance. "Please," she gasped, her voice hoarse and cracked. "Water." Thomas reached down and helped her to her feet, steadying her as she drank greedily from the dipper he offered. She was young, perhaps 22 or 23, with delicate features marred by exhaustion and what looked like days of hard travel. Her clothes, though filthy and torn, had once been fine quality, the kind a respectable woman might wear to church on Sunday. "How long have you been traveling?" Thomas asked, his voice low and steady. The woman lowered the dipper, water dripping from her chin. 3 days, maybe 4. I lost track." "Where are you headed?" She hesitated, her gray eyes darting toward the road that led away from his ranch, then back to his face. Thomas Fletcher was 30 years old, tall and broad-shouldered from years of hard work, with sun-darkened skin and hands that showed every fence built and every horse broken. His reputation in these parts was solid, a man who kept his word and minded his own business, which made him trustworthy in a land where trust was a rare commodity. "I'm not sure," she finally admitted. "Just away." Thomas studied her for a long moment. The year was 1882, and Montana Territory was still wild country despite the railroad pushing through. Women did not travel alone through this land unless they had no other choice, and the desperation in her eyes told him volumes about what might be chasing her. "You are running from someone," he said, not as a question but as a statement of fact. The woman's shoulders sagged, and for a moment Thomas thought she might collapse again. Instead, she straightened, lifting her chin with a pride that impressed him despite her obvious vulnerability. "I am wanted by the law," she confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush. "There are bounty hunters and marshals looking for me. If you help me, you could be arrested too. I should not have stopped here. I will go." Thomas reached out and caught her arm as she turned to leave, his grip gentle but firm. "Not anymore," he said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "You are wanted by me." She stared at him as if he had lost his mind, which perhaps he had. Thomas Fletcher was known for his level head and practical nature, not for taking in fugitives. But something about this woman, something in the way she stood her ground despite her fear, made him want to protect her. "You do not understand," she said, shaking her head. "I am accused of theft. $5,000 from a bank in Bozeman. They will hang me if they catch me." "Did you steal it?" Thomas asked directly. Her gray eyes met his, and he saw the truth there before she spoke. "No, but the evidence says otherwise, and the man who actually took it made sure I would be blamed." Thomas had been ranching in Montana since 1875, building his spread from nothing into one of the most successful operations in the territory. He had dealt with rustlers, con men, and every kind of scoundrel the West produced. He considered himself a good judge of character, and this woman did not strike him as a thief. "What is your name?" he asked. "Penelope Richardson." "Well, Miss Richardson, my name is Thomas Fletcher, and this is the Double F Ranch. You look like you could use a hot meal and a safe place to rest. We can discuss your situation after you have had both." Penelope shook her head vigorously. "You do not know what you are offering. The men chasing me are ruthless. They will not care about your ranch or your reputation." They will burn this place to the ground if they think I am here. Then we will make sure they do not think you are here, Thomas said calmly. He turned toward the ranch house, a sturdy log structure he had built with his own hands. Come on, my housekeeper, Mrs. Morrison, will get you cleaned up and fed. Penelope followed reluctantly, glancing over her shoulder at the road every few steps. Thomas understood her fear, but he also knew that if she kept running in her current state, she would not survive another 3 days in the wilderness. Bears, wolves, and the harsh Montana weather were just as dangerous as any bounty hunter. Mrs. Morrison, a stout woman in her 50s who had been keeping house for Thomas since his mother passed 2 years prior, took one look at Penelope and immediately went into action. She ushered the younger woman into the back room, clucking her tongue over the state of her clothes and asking no questions beyond whether she preferred beef or chicken for supper. Thomas returned to his work, though his mind kept drifting to the woman now under his roof. He had not lied when he said she was wanted by him, though he could not quite explain the feeling that had gripped him the moment their eyes met. It was not just her beauty, though she was indeed lovely beneath the grime and exhaustion. It was something deeper, a recognition that resonated in his chest like the ringing of a bell. His ranch foreman, Charlie Davies, approached as the sun finally dipped below the mountain peaks, casting long shadows across the valley. Charlie was a weathered cowboy in his late 40s who had ridden with Thomas since the beginning. That woman in the house, Charlie said without preamble. She running from the law. Thomas did not bother asking how Charlie knew. The man had instincts honed by decades of living on the edge of civilization. She says she is innocent. You believe her? I do. Charlie was silent for a moment, then nodded. All right then. What do you need from us? This was why Thomas valued Charlie above all his other hands. Loyalty was not just a word to men like Charlie Davies. It was a code they lived by. Keep your eyes open, Thomas said. If strangers come asking questions, I want to know about it immediately, and make sure the boys keep their mouths shut in town. Understood, boss. That evening, Penelope emerged from the back room looking transformed. Mrs. Morrison had found her a simple calico dress that must have belonged to Thomas's late mother, and her dark hair, now clean, hung in damp waves down her back. She still looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes, but the haunted desperation had eased slightly. Thomas stood as she entered the dining room, gesturing to the chair across from him. Please sit. The meal was simple but hearty. Roasted chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, and green beans from Mrs. Morrison's garden. Penelope ate slowly at first, as if afraid the food might disappear, then with increasing appetite. Thomas watched her over his own plate, noting the refined way she held her fork despite her hunger, the straight posture that spoke of good breeding. You are from back east, he observed. Penelope nodded, swallowing before she spoke. Boston originally. My father was a banker there. He died 3 years ago, and my mother followed him 6 months later. I came west with my aunt and uncle when they decided to try their fortune in Montana. The bank in Bozeman, was it your uncle's establishment? Her hands tightened on her fork. Yes. My uncle, Harold Richardson, opened the Bozeman First Security Bank 2 years ago. It was quite successful until someone robbed it, and they blamed you. Penelope set down her fork, her appetite suddenly gone. My uncle's business partner, a man named Gerald Hawthorne, disappeared the same night the money was taken. But he left behind a ledger that showed I had been embezzling funds for months. It was all false, every entry a forgery, but my signature was on the documents. Hawthorne must have traced my signature, practiced until he could replicate it perfectly. Thomas leaned back in his chair, considering. Where is your uncle now? He wanted to believe me, Penelope said softly, but the evidence was so damning and his business was ruined. The last time I saw him, he told me he could not help me anymore, that I had to face the consequences of my actions. My aunt would not even look at me, so you ran. What choice did I have? I was in jail awaiting trial, but I knew how it would end. I would hang, and Hawthorne would get away with everything. One of the deputies, a young man who believed I was innocent, left my cell door unlocked one night. He told me to run and never look back. Thomas drummed his fingers on the table, his mind working through the problem. This Hawthorne, do you know where he went? No. He could be anywhere by now, California probably, or maybe Mexico. $5,000 would take him far, or he could still be in Montana, Thomas suggested. Think about it. He went to considerable trouble to frame you. Why would he do that, instead of simply disappearing with the money? Penelope frowned, considering. I do not know. Perhaps he thought it would buy him more time before anyone suspected him. Or perhaps there was more to his plan than just the theft. Thomas stood and walked to the window, looking out at his darkened ranch yard. In my experience, men like that are not satisfied with one score. They are always looking for the next opportunity. Even if you are right, what difference does it make? I am still wanted for a crime I did not commit. Thomas turned back to face her, his expression serious. It makes all the difference. If we can prove Hawthorne was the real thief, your name will be cleared. Penelope shook her head. Mr. Fletcher, you have already risked too much by sheltering me. I cannot ask you to do more. You did not ask. I am offering. Thomas moved closer, and Penelope found herself looking up into eyes that were as steady and reliable as bedrock. I meant what I said earlier. You are wanted by me now, Miss Richardson, and I take care of what is mine. Something in his words, in the quiet intensity of his gaze, made Penelope's breath catch. She barely knew this man, yet he was offering her something no one else had. Belief in her innocence, protection, and perhaps something more that neither of them was quite ready to name. Why would you do this? She asked softly. You do not know me. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. My mother used to say that sometimes the heart knows things the head has not figured out yet. The moment I saw you in my yard, I knew you needed help. And when you looked at me with those eyes full of fight despite your fear, I knew I wanted to be the one to give it to you. Penelope felt tears prick her eyes, the first she had allowed herself to shed since this nightmare began. I do not know what to say. Say you will stay, at least until we can figure out what to do about clearing your name. I will stay, Penelope agreed, her voice barely above a whisper. The next morning, Thomas rose before dawn, as was his habit. He found Penelope already in the kitchen, helping Mrs. Morrison prepare breakfast for the ranch hands. The older woman was teaching her how to make proper biscuits, and the two were laughing together like old friends. She is a natural, Mrs. Morrison announced when she saw Thomas in the doorway. Better hand with dough than I have seen in years. Penelope's cheeks flushed at the compliment, and Thomas noticed how the morning light streaming through the window caught the auburn highlights in her dark hair. She had pulled it back in a simple braid, and the calico dress made her look like she belonged here, like she had always been part of his home. After breakfast, Thomas took Penelope on a tour of the ranch. The Double F sprawled across 5,000 acres of prime Montana grassland, with cattle grazing as far as the eye could see and horses in the corral that made Penelope gasp with admiration. They are beautiful, she said, watching a chestnut mare trot past. You ride? Thomas asked. I used to back in Boston, but it has been years. Thomas opened the corral gate and whistled. The chestnut mare approached, tossing her head. This is Bella. She is gentle as a lamb and smart as they come. If you are going to stay here, you should know how to handle a horse. Montana is not kind to those who cannot ride. He saddled Bella while explaining each step, then helped Penelope mount. His hands were warm and steady on her waist, and she found herself acutely aware of his proximity, the faint scent of leather and sage that clung to him. They rode out across the ranch together, Thomas on his big bay gelding and Penelope on Bella. She was rusty at first, but muscle memory returned quickly, and soon she was laughing with pure joy as the wind whipped through her hair. "I had forgotten how wonderful this feels," she called to Thomas. "Being free, feeling the wind." Thomas smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his usually serious face. "Freedom is what the West is all about, Penelope. Out here, what you are does not matter as much as what you are." They stopped on a rise overlooking the valley, and Thomas pointed out the boundaries of his land, telling her about the years of hard work that had built the Double F into what it was today. Penelope listened, fascinated by this man who had created something lasting from nothing but determination and sweat. "You love this place," she observed. "It is everything to me," Thomas admitted. "Or at least it was." He turned to look at her, and something in his gaze made her heart skip. "But lately, I have been thinking that a ranch is just land and cattle without someone to share it with." Before Penelope could respond, the sound of hoofbeats made them both turn. Charlie Davies was riding hard toward them, and Thomas immediately knew something was wrong. "Boss," Charlie called as he pulled his horse to a stop. "We have got trouble. 3 men rode into town this morning asking questions about a woman matching Penelope's description. They are claiming to be bounty hunters, and they have got a wanted poster with a sketch that looks mighty close to her." Thomas's jaw tightened. "How much time do we have?" They were headed to the Morrison place when I left town. Someone must have told them about Mrs. Morrison working out here. They will probably arrive by late afternoon. Thomas looked at Penelope, whose face had gone pale. "We need to get you somewhere safe. Charlie, get the wagon ready. We are taking Penelope to the line shack up in the north pasture. It is remote enough that no one will think to look there." "Thomas, no," Penelope protested. "I will not let you risk everything for me. If I leave now, ride hard for the Canadian border, maybe I can make it." "You would never survive the journey alone," Thomas said flatly. "And I am not letting you run anymore, Penelope. We are going to face this together." Within an hour, Penelope was hidden in the back of a wagon under a tarp, bouncing along a rough trail toward the distant mountains. Thomas drove while Charlie rode ahead to make sure the path was clear. The line shack was a small cabin Thomas used during spring roundup, stocked with basic supplies and located in a box canyon that was nearly impossible to find unless you knew where to look. They arrived as the sun reached its zenith. Thomas helped Penelope down from the wagon, and she looked around at the rustic cabin with its single room and stone fireplace. "It is not much," Thomas said, "but it is safe. No one knows about this place except my most trusted hands." "It is perfect," Penelope assured him. She caught his hand, squeezing it gently. "Thank you, Thomas, for everything." He looked down at their joined hands, then up at her face. "I need to get back to the ranch before those bounty hunters arrive. Charlie will stay with you, keep you safe." "What will you tell them?" "The truth. That Mrs. Morrison works for me, but I have not seen any strange women around my property." Thomas hesitated, then reached up and cupped her cheek with his rough palm. "Penelope, I want you to know something. When this is over, when your name is cleared, I hope you will consider staying here. Not because you are hiding, but because you want to." Penelope leaned into his touch, her eyes searching his face. "Thomas, I barely know you, yet I feel safer with you than I have felt in months, maybe years. I do not understand it." "Neither do I," he admitted. "But I want the chance to figure it out." He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away, but Penelope rose on her toes to meet him halfway. Their lips touched gently at first, a question and an answer all at once. Then Thomas pulled her closer, deepening the kiss, and Penelope felt something inside her crack open, flooding her with warmth and hope, and a longing so intense it almost frightened her. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Thomas rested his forehead against hers, his hand still gentle on her waist. "Stay safe," he whispered. "I will come back for you as soon as I can." "Be careful," Penelope said. "Do not take any risks on my account." Thomas smiled slightly. Too late for that. He mounted his horse and rode away, looking back only once to see Penelope standing in the doorway of the cabin, her hand raised in farewell. Charlie Davies tactfully busied himself checking the cabins would supply, giving them what privacy he could. Thomas arrived back at the Double F just as three hard-looking men rode into his yard. They wore the dust-covered clothes of men who had been on the trail for days, and all three had the cold eyes of professional manhunters. The leader was a tall man with a scar running down his left cheek, and he carried himself with the arrogant confidence of someone used to getting his way. "Thomas Fletcher?" the scarred man asked, not bothering with pleasantries. "That is right. And you are?" "Name is Garrett Stone. I am a bounty hunter working for the Bozeman First Security Bank. We are looking for a fugitive named Penelope Richardson." He pulled out a folded poster and handed it to Thomas. "Wanted for theft and embezzlement. Have you seen this woman?" Thomas studied the poster carefully. The sketch was crude but recognizable, showing a young woman with dark hair and delicate features. The reward listed was $2,000, a fortune that would tempt many men to turn in their own mothers. "Cannot say that I have," Thomas said, handing the poster back. "But then, I do not spend much time in town. My foreman might know more." He gestured toward the bunkhouse where several of his hands were lounging in the shade. All of them had been briefed that morning about what to say if questioned. "We heard you employ a woman housekeeper," Stone said, his eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Woman named Morrison." "Mrs. Morrison has worked for me for 2 years, Thomas confirmed. "She is old enough to be my mother and about as dangerous as a church mouse." "You are welcome to speak with her if you like." Stone gestured to his companions and they dismounted. Thomas led them to the main house, where Mrs. Morrison was scrubbing pots in the kitchen. She looked up with genuine surprise when the men entered, playing her part perfectly. "Mrs. Morrison, these gentlemen are looking for a fugitive," Thomas said. "Have you seen any strange women around the ranch lately?" "Strange women?" Mrs. Morrison dried her hands on her apron, frowning thoughtfully. "No, sir. Only women I have seen are the Jackson girls when they came by selling eggs last week." "Why, what has happened?" Stone questioned her for several minutes, but Mrs. Morrison stuck to her story with the ease of someone telling the simple truth. Finally, frustrated, Stone turned back to Thomas. "We will be searching the area for the next few days," he said. "If you see anything, there is a reward for information leading to her capture." "I will keep that in mind," Thomas said neutrally. After the bounty hunters left, Thomas gathered his ranch hands in the barn. "Those men are going to be watching us," he told them. "No one goes to the north pasture for any reason. If anyone asks, we are keeping the cattle south this season because of better grass." "Understood." The men nodded their agreement. Thomas knew he could trust them. Many had been with him for years, and they were fiercely loyal to the Double F and to him personally. For the next 3 days, Thomas went about his normal routine, aware that Stone and his men were watching from a distance. He made a show of working with his cattle, riding his usual routes, acting as if nothing was out of the ordinary. But every night, after the ranch was quiet, he would saddle his horse and ride to the line shack to check on Penelope. Those stolen hours in the darkness became precious to both of them. They would sit by the fire while Charlie discreetly kept watch outside, and they would talk about everything and nothing. Penelope told Thomas about growing up in Boston, about her parents and her childhood dreams. Thomas shared stories about building the ranch, about the loneliness of the frontier and the satisfaction of creating something with his own hands. "I always thought I would marry some Boston banker," Penelope said one night, staring into the flames. "Live in a big house on Beacon Hill, host dinner parties, raise children who would go to the finest schools. It all seemed so important then." "And now?" Thomas asked. Penelope looked at him, her gray eyes reflecting the firelight. "Now I think I was asleep for most of my life, going through the motions of what I was supposed to want instead of figuring out what I actually wanted." "What do you want, Penelope?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I want to be free. Not just from the law, but from all the expectations and rules that have governed my entire life. I want to wake up each morning and choose my own path. I want to feel alive, the way I felt riding with you across your land." She paused, then added softly, "I want to be with someone who sees me, really sees me, not just the version of myself I was taught to present to the world." Thomas reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I see you, Penelope. I see a woman who is brave and resilient, who kept her dignity even when the world turned against her. I see someone who laughs with joy at simple things like riding a horse or making biscuits. I see the woman I want to build a life with, if you will have me." Penelope's breath caught. "Thomas, you are offering me everything I did not know I wanted, but I cannot accept until this is resolved. Until I am free and my name is cleared, I am not truly my own person to give." "Then we will clear your name," Thomas said with determination. "Tomorrow, I am riding to Bozeman. It is time to do some investigating of our own." "It is too dangerous," Penelope protested. "No more dangerous than harboring a fugitive," Thomas pointed out with a slight smile. "Besides, Charlie will stay here with you. You will be safe." The next morning, Thomas set out for Bozeman with one of his hands, a young cowboy named Pete Wilson who had family in town and could ask questions without raising suspicion. The ride took most of the day, and they arrived in the bustling town just as the sun was setting. Bozeman in 1882 was a growing community, boosted by the railroad and the mining operations in the surrounding mountains. Thomas checked into a hotel under an assumed name, then spent the evening in the saloon, listening to gossip and buying drinks for loose-lipped miners. Pete returned near midnight with information. "The bank is still closed," he reported quietly in Thomas's hotel room. "Richardson lost everything when it failed. He and his wife moved to Helena to live with her sister. But here is the interesting part. Gerald Hawthorne did not just disappear. He has been spotted in Virginia City, living under the name Gerald Harper and working as a financial advisor." Thomas sat up straighter. "Virginia City? That is only a few days' ride from here." "That is what I thought. Seems odd for a man on the run to stay so close to the scene of his crime." "Unless he has unfinished business," Thomas mused. "Or unless he is waiting for something." He spent the next day making discreet inquiries, piecing together information about Hawthorne's movements before the theft. What he learned was disturbing. Hawthorne had been courting several wealthy widows in the area, always with an eye toward their finances. He was a con man, a professional thief who used charm and forgery to separate people from their money. But the most interesting piece of information came from a clerk at the land office. Hawthorne had been asking questions about ranch properties in the area, specifically about the Double F and its owner. Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. This was not a coincidence. Hawthorne had targeted Penelope for a reason, and Thomas was beginning to suspect what that reason might be. He rode back to the ranch hard, arriving exhausted but armed with new information. After checking in with his foreman and making sure everything was secure, he rode up to the line shack to share what he had learned with Penelope. She listened to his report with growing concern. "But why would Hawthorne care about your ranch?" she asked. "I have been thinking about that," Thomas said. "Your uncle's bank held the mortgages on several properties in the area, did it not?" "Yes, including yours, if I remember correctly." "Exactly. When the bank failed, those mortgages should have been transferred to another institution or sold to investors. But what if Hawthorne planned to buy them himself, using the stolen money? He could have acquired controlling interest in half the ranches in the territory for a fraction of their worth." Penelope's eyes widened. "That is why he framed me instead of just disappearing. He needed time to execute his plan, and having a convenient scapegoat meant no one would look too closely at where the money really went. And if I am right, he is still in Virginia City because his scheme is not complete yet. He is waiting for the right moment to make his move." "So what do we do?" Penelope asked. Thomas was quiet for a moment, formulating a plan. "We set a trap. If Hawthorne thinks he can acquire the double F, he will come for it. And when he does, we will be ready." Over the next week, Thomas carefully spread the word that he was having financial troubles, that he might be forced to sell the double F to cover debts. It was a dangerous gambit, as it could damage his reputation and his business, but it was also the best way to draw Hawthorne out of hiding. Meanwhile, Penelope remained at the line shack, though the forced isolation was beginning to wear on her. She missed the bustle of the ranch house, the friendly conversations with Mrs. Morrison, and most of all, she missed being with Thomas. Their stolen moments together had evolved from simple attraction into something deeper, a connection that felt as inevitable as the turning of the seasons. One evening, Thomas arrived at the line shack to find Penelope outside, staring up at the stars. He dismounted and joined her, and she immediately moved into his arms as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "I received a letter today," Thomas said quietly. "Hawthorne took the bait. He is coming to the double F tomorrow to discuss purchasing the property." Penelope tensed in his arms. "Tomorrow? So soon? The faster we move, the better. I have contacted the territorial marshal, a man I trust named William Cooper. He will be there as a witness when Hawthorne incriminates himself. And if he does not, what if he is too clever to be caught?" Thomas tilted her chin up so he could look into her eyes. "Then we will find another way. I am not giving up on you, Penelope. I am not giving up on us." She kissed him then, pouring all her fear and hope and love into that single kiss. Thomas responded with equal passion, his arms tightening around her as if he could keep her safe through sheer force of will. "I love you," Penelope whispered against his lips. "I know it is too soon. I know we barely know each other, but I cannot help what I feel." "It is not too soon," Thomas said firmly. "I have loved you since the moment you collapsed in my yard, since you looked at me with those fierce eyes and refused to give up. I love you, Penelope Richardson, and I am going to prove it by giving you back your freedom." The next day, Gerald Hawthorne arrived at the Double F Ranch in a fancy carriage, dressed in an expensive suit and carrying a leather satchel. He was a handsome man in his early 40s, with silver-streaked hair and the smooth manners of a professional confidence artist. Thomas met him in the ranch house office, offering whiskey and settling in to discuss business. Marshal Cooper was hidden in the next room, listening through a crack in the door. "I must say, Mr. Fletcher, I was surprised to hear that a man of your reputation was having financial difficulties," Hawthorne said, sipping his whiskey. "Times are hard," Thomas said with a carefully crafted note of resignation. Cattle prices are down, and I overextended myself last year buying breeding stock. I need to raise capital quickly or lose everything." Hawthorne nodded sympathetically. "I understand completely. Fortunately, I am in a position to help. I have recently come into some money and I am looking to invest in Montana properties. The Double F would be a perfect addition to my portfolio." "What kind of price are we talking about?" Thomas asked. Hawthorne pulled papers from his satchel, spreading them on the desk. "I have done my research, Mr. Fletcher. Your ranch is worth approximately $50,000 at current market value. However, given your urgent need for cash, I am prepared to offer you $15,000 to be paid immediately." Thomas pretended to consider, though inside he was seething at the man's audacity. "That is quite a bit lower than market value." "True, but I am offering cash money, no waiting, no complications, and I am willing to let you stay on as foreman if you like, running the ranch you built." Hawthorne's smile was smooth as oil. "It is a generous offer under the circumstances." "Under what circumstances exactly?" Thomas asked, his voice hardening slightly. Hawthorne's smile never wavered. "Come now, Mr. Fletcher. We are both men of the world. I know you are harboring a fugitive. A woman named Penelope Richardson wanted for theft. If that information were to reach the authorities, you would be arrested as an accessory. Your ranch would be seized and auctioned off. You would get nothing." "Is that a threat, Mr. Hawthorne?" "Not at all. Simply a statement of fact. However, if you were to sell me the ranch now and help me locate Miss Richardson, I would be willing to increase my offer to $20,000. That is more than fair, I think." Thomas leaned back in his chair, studying the man across from him. "You seem very interested in Miss Richardson's whereabouts. Why is that?" "There is a reward for her capture," Hawthorne said smoothly. $2,000, enough to make it worth my while. Or perhaps you have another reason for wanting her found. Perhaps because she is the only person who can prove you stole that money from the Bozeman Bank." Hawthorne's expression flickered just for a moment before the smooth mask returned. "I have no idea what you are talking about." "No." Thomas stood and walked to the window. "I think you do. I think you framed Penelope Richardson for your own theft, then stuck around to buy up the mortgages held by her uncle's failed bank. You saw an opportunity to acquire valuable properties for pennies on the dollar, and one woman's life was a small price to pay for that kind of profit. You are making some very serious accusations, Mr. Fletcher, accusations you cannot possibly prove." "Actually, I can." Thomas pulled a folded document from his desk drawer. "This is a copy of a land purchase agreement filed in Virginia City under the name Gerald Harper. The signature matches documents filed in Bozeman under the name Gerald Hawthorne. The same hand wrote both, which means you have been using two identities. Now, why would an honest businessman need to do that?" Hawthorne stood slowly, his hand moving toward his jacket. But before he could draw whatever weapon he carried, Marshal Cooper stepped through the door, his own gun already drawn. "I would not do that if I were you," the marshal said calmly. "Gerald Hawthorne, you are under arrest for theft, fraud, and conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent, though I suspect you will have plenty to say once we start digging into your activities." Hawthorne's face twisted with rage. "This is a setup. You have no proof of anything." "We have plenty of proof," Thomas said, "including testimony from a bank clerk in Virginia City, who will swear you deposited large sums of cash around the same time the Bozeman Bank was robbed. We have handwriting analysis showing the forged documents were written by you. And we have your own words from this conversation, which the marshal heard with his own ears." Hawthorne lunged for Thomas, but the marshal was faster, bringing his gun down on the con man's head with enough force to stun him. Within minutes, Hawthorne was handcuffed and being loaded into a wagon for transport to the territorial jail. Thomas rode immediately to the line shack, his heart pounding with a mixture of triumph and anticipation. He found Penelope pacing outside the cabin, her face tight with worry. "It is over," he called out as he dismounted. "Hawthorne is in custody. You are free, Penelope." She stared at him for a moment as if unable to comprehend his words, then burst into tears. Thomas caught her in his arms, holding her as she sobbed out all the fear and tension of the past weeks. "You are safe now," he murmured into her hair. "You are free. No more running, no more hiding. It is over." When Penelope finally calmed enough to speak, she pulled back to look at him through tear-filled eyes. "I do not know how to thank you. You have given me back my life." "I do not want your thanks," Thomas said gently. "I want you to stay. I want you to marry me to help me build something beautiful here. I want to wake up every morning with you beside me and go to sleep every night knowing you are safe in my arms." "I want everything, Penelope, if you will give it to me," Penelope laughed, a sound of pure joy. "Yes, yes to all of it. I love you, Thomas Fletcher. I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Thomas kissed her then, a long, deep kiss that sealed their promise to each other. When they finally broke apart, Charlie Davies was standing a respectful distance away, grinning from ear to ear. "I reckon that is my cue to head back to the ranch," Charlie said. "Congratulations, boss, Miss Richardson." The next weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Hawthorne's confession led to the recovery of most of the stolen money, and Penelope's name was officially cleared by the territorial court. Her uncle and aunt, ashamed of their lack of faith in her, sent a letter of apology and an offer to rebuild their relationship, which Penelope graciously accepted. Thomas and Penelope were married in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with Mrs. Morrison crying happy tears and all the ranch hands dressed in their Sunday best. The local preacher, a kind man named Reverend Matthews, performed the service under a brilliant blue Montana sky, with the mountains standing witness to their vows. Penelope wore a dress of ivory lace that Mrs. Morrison had carefully preserved from her own wedding day, altered to fit Penelope's slender frame. Thomas wore a new black suit that made him look almost uncomfortable, though his eyes never left his bride's face throughout the ceremony. "I, Thomas Fletcher, take you, Penelope Richardson, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he said, his voice strong and clear. "I promise to love you, to protect you, to stand by your side through whatever trials this life may bring. I promise to build a future with you, to cherish you every day, and to never take for granted the gift of your love." Penelope's voice was equally steady as she made her own vows. "I, Penelope Richardson, take you, Thomas Fletcher, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you with all my heart, to support your dreams as you have supported mine, to be your partner in all things. I promise to build a home with you, to fill it with love and laughter, and to remind you every day that choosing to help a desperate woman in your yard was the best decision you ever made." When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Thomas kissed his bride with such tenderness that several of the cowboys had to look away, blinking suspiciously. The celebration that followed was joyous and heartfelt. The ranch hands had roasted a whole steer, Mrs. Morrison had baked enough pies to feed an army, and someone had brought a fiddle for dancing. As the sun set behind the mountains, Thomas led Penelope in a waltz across the ranch yard, their movements awkward but full of love. "Happy, Mrs. Fletcher?" Thomas asked, pulling her close. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Penelope replied, resting her head on his chest. "A few months ago, I had lost everything. I was alone, frightened, and running from a crime I did not commit. And now I have a home, a husband who loves me, and a future full of possibilities." "We have only just begun," Thomas promised. "There is so much more ahead of us." And he was right. The first year of their marriage was filled with challenges and triumphs. Penelope threw herself into ranch life with enthusiasm, learning everything from cattle management to horseshoeing. She had a natural head for numbers and took over managing the ranch's finances, proving to be even more skilled than Thomas had imagined. But it was the small moments that Penelope treasured most. The way Thomas would reach for her hand as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. The mornings they would ride out together to check on the cattle, racing across the grasslands like children. The nights they spent in each other's arms, learning every inch of each other, building a physical connection that matched their emotional bond. In the spring of 1883, Penelope discovered she was pregnant. Thomas was so overjoyed he picked her up and spun her around, then immediately set her down carefully, afraid he had been too rough. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," Penelope laughed, touching his face. "But I love how protective you are." "I cannot help it," Thomas said, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "You are carrying our child, Penelope, our future. I want to keep you both safe." Their son was born in December during the first snowfall of the season. The birth was long and difficult, and Thomas paced the kitchen floor while Mrs. Morrison and the doctor attended to Penelope. When he finally heard the baby's first cry, he felt his knees go weak with relief. Mrs. Morrison emerged from the bedroom, her face wreathed in smiles. "You have a son, Mr. Fletcher, a big, healthy boy, and your wife is doing well." Thomas rushed into the bedroom to find Penelope exhausted but radiant, holding a swaddled bundle in her arms. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and when he opened his eyes, Thomas saw they were the same storm gray as his mother's. "Meet your son," Penelope said softly. "I thought we could name him James, after your father." Thomas carefully took the baby in his arms, marveling at how small and perfect he was. "James Fletcher," he said, testing the name. "It is perfect. You are perfect." He bent to kiss Penelope's forehead. "Thank you for this gift. Thank you for everything." As James grew, he proved to be a happy, curious child with his mother's intelligence and his father's steady temperament. By the time he was 2, Penelope was pregnant again, and in the summer of 1886, they welcomed a daughter they named Sarah. The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. The Double F Ranch continued to prosper under Thomas's management and Penelope's financial acumen. They added more land, improved their breeding stock, and earned a reputation as one of the most successful ranching operations in Montana. But their greatest success was their family. After Sarah came another son, Michael, in 1889. And finally another daughter, Elizabeth, in 1892. The Fletcher children grew up strong and capable, learning to ride almost before they could walk, helping with ranch chores, and understanding that the land they lived on was a privilege that came with responsibility. Penelope often thought back to that desperate day when she had stumbled into Thomas's ranch yard, running from a crime she did not commit. It seemed like a lifetime ago, like something that had happened to a different person. The frightened, desperate woman she had been had transformed into someone confident and strong, a woman who knew her own mind and her own worth. One evening, when the children were all asleep and the house was quiet, Penelope and Thomas sat on their porch watching the stars. It was a ritual they had maintained throughout their marriage, this quiet time together at the end of each day. "You ever regret it?" Penelope asked suddenly. "Taking me in that day, the risk you took, the trouble it caused?" Thomas turned to look at her, the moonlight casting shadows across his weathered face. He was 43 now, with silver threading through his dark hair, but his eyes were as steady and loving as they had been the day they met. "Regret finding the love of my life." Regret building a family with the most incredible woman I have ever known. He shook his head. Not for a single moment, Penelope. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. Even though I brought bounty hunters and danger to your door, even though, Thomas confirmed. You know what I regret? I regret every day we spent apart before you came into my life. I regret that I did not find you sooner. Penelope smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. I was thinking today about what you said to me that first day. Not anymore, you are wanted by me. Those words changed my life, Thomas. They gave me hope when I had none. You gave me purpose, Thomas replied. Before you, I was just building a ranch, accumulating land and cattle because that was what a man did. But you taught me what I was really building toward. A home. A family. A legacy of love. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. In the distance, a coyote howled and cattle lowed softly in their sleep. Inside the house, one of the children cried out briefly, then settled back down. I received a letter from my uncle today, Penelope said. He is dying and he wants to see me before he passes. He wants to meet his grandnieces and grandnephews. Do you want to go? Penelope considered. Yes, I think I do. He made mistakes, but he has spent the last decade trying to make amends. And I want the children to know their family, to understand where they come from. Then we will all go, Thomas decided. It is time the Fletcher family took a trip to Helena. The journey to Helena was an adventure for the children, who had never traveled far from the ranch. They stayed with Penelope's uncle and aunt for a week, and though the reunion was emotional, it was also healing. Harold Richardson was indeed dying, ravaged by the cancer that was consuming him, but he found enough strength to apologize to Penelope with tears streaming down his face. I failed you when you needed me most, he said, his voice weak. I let my own fear and pride blind me to the truth. Can you ever forgive me? Penelope took his hand gently. I forgave you long ago, Uncle Harold. Life is too short to carry grudges. What matters is that we are together now, that you can know my children and see that I am happy. Harold looked at Thomas, who stood behind Penelope with young Elizabeth in his arms. You found a good man, Penelope, better than I had any right to hope for you. I found the best man, Penelope agreed, smiling at her husband. They returned to the Double F with a sense of peace and completion. Penelope had made peace with her past, and now she could fully embrace her future. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. Montana achieved statehood in 1889, and Thomas was elected to the state legislature, where he worked to protect the interests of ranchers and promote fair treatment of all citizens. Penelope worked alongside him, using her education and experience to advise on financial matters and social reform. Their children grew into remarkable adults. James took over the daily management of the ranch when Thomas's political duties kept him away. Sarah became a teacher in Marysville, the nearby town that had grown up along the railroad line. Michael studied law and became an advocate for property rights, while Elizabeth inherited her mother's head for numbers and helped modernize the ranch's business practices. In 1910, Thomas and Penelope celebrated their 28th wedding anniversary. They were both in their early 50s now, their hair gray and their faces lined with the marks of a life fully lived. But their love had only deepened with time, maturing like fine wine into something rich and precious. They held a party at the ranch, inviting friends and neighbors from miles around. Their children and grandchildren filled the house with laughter and noise. James and his wife had given them 4 grandchildren. Sarah had 3, and Michael had just welcomed his first child. As the party wound down and the guests departed, Thomas and Penelope found themselves alone on the porch once again, watching the sun set behind the mountains they loved. 28 years, Penelope marveled. Sometimes it feels like just yesterday I stumbled into your yard, desperate and afraid. Other times it feels like we have been together forever. Both are true, Thomas said, pulling her close. Every day with you feels new and exciting, but also like coming home to something familiar and beloved. Do you remember what you said to me? After I confessed I was wanted by the law, Thomas smiled. I said, not anymore. You are wanted by me, and I meant every word. You are still wanted by me, Penelope. Every day, every hour, every moment, I want you by my side, in my arms, in my life. I will want you until my last breath and beyond. Penelope turned in his arms to kiss him, a kiss that still had the power to make her heart race after nearly 3 decades of marriage. And you have me, Thomas Fletcher, all of me for all time. As they stood together watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, Penelope reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had been accused of a crime she did not commit, hunted by the law, desperate and alone. But instead of meeting her end in some dusty Montana town, she had found salvation in the form of a rancher with steady blue eyes and a heart big enough to trust a stranger. Thomas had not just saved her life that day. He had given her a reason to live, a purpose beyond mere survival. He had shown her what love could be when it was freely given and fully received, without conditions or reservations. Their children and grandchildren were the legacy of that love, a testament to what could be built when two people chose to trust each other despite the odds. The Double F Ranch, now one of the largest and most successful in Montana, was more than just land and cattle. It was a home built on faith and hope, a sanctuary where love had conquered fear. The years continued to unfold with their inevitable mixture of joy and sorrow. Thomas retired from politics in 1915, content to spend his remaining years working the land he loved. Penelope continued her work with various charitable organizations, helping other women who found themselves in desperate circumstances, just as she had once been. In 1920, they celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. Thomas was 70 years old now, still strong but moving more slowly, his hands gnarled from decades of hard work. Penelope was 62, her dark hair now completely silver, but her gray eyes still sparkled with the same fierce intelligence that had first captivated Thomas. 40 years, Thomas said, raising a glass of champagne in a toast. 40 years since the most stubborn, beautiful, incredible woman I have ever known stumbled into my life and turned everything upside down. 40 years of love, laughter, hard work, and the occasional argument. More than occasional, Penelope interjected with a smile, and everyone laughed. 40 years of building something that will last long after we are gone, Thomas continued. A family rooted in love and strengthened by adversity. A legacy that our children and grandchildren will carry forward. And all of it began because I took one look at a desperate woman in my ranch yard and knew, absolutely knew, that she was meant to be mine. Penelope stood and clinked her glass against his. And I took one look at a rancher who offered me safety when I had none, belief when I was condemned, and love when I least expected it, and I knew I had found my home. Not just a place, but a person. You are my home, Thomas Fletcher. You always have been. They kissed to the cheers and applause of their family. And as Penelope looked around the room at the faces of the people they had created together, she felt a profound sense of gratitude and completion. Thomas Fletcher passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1925 at the age of 75. He was buried on a hill overlooking the ranch he had built, with a simple headstone that read, Thomas Fletcher, beloved husband, father, and friend. He chose love over fear. Penelope grieved deeply for her husband, but she did not retreat from life. She continued to live at the ranch, surrounded by her family, remaining active and engaged until her own passing 5 years later, in 1930. True to her wishes, she was buried beside Thomas, her headstone reading, "Penelope Richardson Fletcher, beloved wife, mother, and friend. She was wanted and she was loved." Their children ensured that the Double F Ranch continued to prosper, passing it down through the generations. The story of how their parents met became a family legend, told and retold around dinner tables and campfires. It was a story of courage and faith, of a desperate woman who found salvation and a lonely rancher who discovered that the greatest treasure was not land or cattle, but love freely given and received. And on quiet evenings, when the wind whispered through the Montana grasslands and the stars emerged in the vast western sky, it was said you could still feel the love that Thomas and Penelope had built together, as enduring and permanent as the mountains themselves. Their legacy was not just the ranch or the family they had created, but the simple truth they had lived every day of their marriage. That one person choosing to see the good in another, one person choosing to offer help when it was desperately needed, could change not just 2 lives but countless generations to come. The wanted woman had found more than sanctuary. She had found her purpose, her place, and her person. And the rancher who had offered her protection had discovered that sometimes the greatest risks bring the greatest rewards, that opening your heart to a stranger could lead to a lifetime of love. In the end, Penelope was wanted by the law for a crime she did not commit. But she was wanted far more deeply, far more permanently, by a man who saw past her circumstances to the person she truly was. And in that wanting, in that choosing, they had built something beautiful and lasting that would echo through the ages, a testament to the transformative power of love in the wild, untamed heart of the American West.